Hi, Beatrice. How are you?
How are you, Courtney? Always great to see you. I'm very happy to be here with you, sharing another stage.
Sharing another stage. Always a great way to spend some time. Well, thank you so much for jumping in on this conversation. I always love to hear your perspectives. And, you've had such a phenomenal career. The last time I introduced you at an event, I felt like I could have gone on and on about your successes and wanted to spend some time today really just diving into a topic that I feel needs more attention, especially as founders are starting in their journey or trying to navigate their journey to grow and scale their companies, grow and scale themselves, their teams, etc. And so I wanted to just dive right in. I know we only have limited time to talk about this topic. So you have managed to build two totally successful brands that have seen incredible growth. And I'm curious to hear from you, just as a place to start, what would you consider to have been your biggest driver for success?
A couple of things. I think the biggest driver for both is really community and finding a niche into a very underserved demographic. Where there's a lot of intersectionality. So when you think about, communities of color, in my particular case, the Latino community, the Latinx community, there's a lot of intersectionality. So there's not one size fits all. I think when people think about us, they think, okay, that means immigrant, Spanish dominant, watches soap operas on TV, foreign born, etc. And that is the minority of the US Latinos in this country today. The majority are US born, English dominant, college educated, etc. So I would say to really finding that niche, that it's not really a niche, but it's the biggest group now, and really being able to super serve them and to make them feel like they belong, that your brand absolutely understands them and is like them. So I think that similarity has translated from my previous venture to this one.
And your brands, I encourage the audience to check out both brands that you've developed, but specifically with SUMA Wealth that you're working on now. I mean, you have built a totally authentic brand that's delivering such relevant and important work. What would you say the role of relationships has been just in establishing this specific brand?
I mean, listen, we know relationships matter in anything in life, right? In your personal life, in your professional life. But it's super important that you pay a lot of attention to that. I really didn't even understand what the phrase social capital was. One day, a friend of mine said, yeah, it's easy for you to raise money because you have such social capital. And I was like Googling social capital. What does this mean? You can see, English is my second language. And so I am part of that minority, 19% of the US people that people perceive are all Latinos. But I started to think, oh, wow, like, yeah, I mean, relationships absolutely matter. But I've had to sort of like start over again with my social capital of with my relationships many times. My parents were big philanthropists and very big social leaders in their community when I was a child, when I was born. So that gave me a lot of social capital because everybody knew them, and it was easy to do many things in my community when I was a kid. When I moved to Mexico City, I was born in the border between Mexico and the US. When I moved for work after college to Mexico City, my parents did not work in the entertainment industry. I knew nobody in Mexico City. So right there, I had to start rebuilding those relationships all over again. And it is possible, right? No matter at what age you start. Eventually, I moved to the US in my mid-20s. And there, I absolutely knew no one. It was a very different culture, a different language, a different way of doing business. So that was the third time that I've had to sort of, okay, I'm going to start all over again. And when I started a venture-backed company, I had no relationships with investors. I had no relationships with other tech media founders, et cetera. And now that I'm into fintech. But every single time it's been critical that I never did it by intent. I never thought, oh, let me build the social capital, the relationships. But now that I look back into it, when people say, wow, you know everybody, or everybody likes you, or everybody speaks highly about you, I think that more than that they like me or they speak highly about me, it's that I usually show up. My parents taught me from a very early age that I should be generous with my time if I could. And I think I continue to do that. I feel a bit guilty to be the 0.36% of the stat of a Latina, an immigrant, a woman that has been able to raise substantial amounts of capital for my two companies. So I always feel that I need to constantly give back and to keep opening these doors. So I do it wholeheartedly. I don't do it thinking, oh, it's going to come back, the universe will pay me back for whatever it is that I'm doing. But as much as I can, bring other people up, open doors, make those phone calls, make those introductions, show up for people I know and for people that I don't in my community. I'm always there. So I'm pretty reliable there. And I do have to say, it definitely comes back tenfold, even when you don't intend it to be that way.
Yeah, I guess we can call that one positively powered by guilt, right? Because
exactly.
that guilt, then you're driving forward to help others along. And I see you do that regularly, and I find it really inspiring. And I think you touched on something really interesting that I want to dive into, which is, as you began your journey, first you had to leverage the network that you had in place, right? Just to support you as you started on your journey. And then you needed to think about expanding your network to support you in your growth as your company has grown and scaled. So how did you differentiate the two? And I think for the benefit of the very, very early stage founders who may just be developing their MVP right now, how would you encourage those to just ground themselves in this concept of network and social capital at the very jump, and then it can become more sophisticated over time?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you always need a champion, right? People say you only need one person that believes in you to make it in life. So for us, for women of color, particularly for immigrants, the layers start to get more difficult when it comes to building these networks or being able to fundraise for your companies. I think you have to find that champion, that person that really believes in you and is willing to give you that time and is willing to help you expand your network. But then in return, you need to put in the work, right? I'm always baffled at some early stage founders who hit me up on LinkedIn or on my email. Somehow they find my email, and before saying anything, there's the request, right? I need you to do this. I need you to introduce. And I think, wow, at this stage of my life where I know a lot of people, I would never start an email that way, right? I always start by first asking them how they are. If I don't know them, I'll introduce myself. I'll find some commonality on something that they do, that I do, that we're passionate about. I offer to be of service in things that I know they're looking for example, connecting with founders of color or Latina women, etc. And then I might, do an ask. So it's also super critical that, yes, you find someone who's a champion, someone who is going to help you start navigating the world of how you get introduced to an area that you might not have a lot of connections or contacts. But you also need to be mindful that there's an art, right? There's where that EQ comes in. That is very, very important. And I think particularly if you're a young, new founder who hasn't given back so much, that you can allow yourself to send an email or a note on LinkedIn that's just telling you, I'm hoping to get 60 minutes of your time. So, because I hear you can get me capital, right? You're like, oh, okay, that's going to go at the list of my priorities. Where, I've met other founders where they start their LinkedIn message to me asking me how much do I like tamales, right? And I'm like, oh, you had me at tamales. Of course I love tamales. And they're like, listen, we make the best matcha tamales. These are two young entrepreneurs. And my sister and I would love to make some for you, drive them to your office, and then maybe we could have a few minutes of your time to tell you about our business. I set up that meeting within 30 seconds, right? It was just the creativity. It was just the willingness of somebody to just, also give back, right? Not that I needed to eat the tamales, not that I could make my own tamales. I'm a great cook, but I just thought, wow, like just putting the thought into it was great. And I know other founders who have offered venture capitalists to drive them from the airport to the conference or things like this. And in the way there, they will pitch them their idea, and some have gotten funding. So I think it needs a little bit of a mix of EQ and a little bit of creativity on how you approach somebody that can help you start building those relationships. But the sad thing is, we know it, right? You hear, well, but white men already have the contacts and the friends, and they go to a bar and they throw out an idea and they get the funding. And for women, it's very hard, and it is. And that is why, we have to be mindful that it is important. It is important to build these relationships. And when people say it shouldn't be based on a warm introduction, of course it shouldn't, right? And there's a lot of VCs that have blind submissions so that nobody gets a warm introduction. But relationships still matter. For you to say to somebody, listen, I love this founder, I love this company, it matters. It really does. And until that changes, you have to play that game in a way, right? How are you going to be connected to people that can help you in your journey? And everybody should be pleasantly surprised to know there's incredible networks for women, right? Because we are not at the numbers that we should be for women of color, for women immigrants, for women in LGBTQI+. So find your tribe, find your group, find that person that gets you, that believes in you, and give back, and start building those relationships that way.
Yeah, I think that concept of reciprocity and, really kind of stewarding and managing first the network that you already have, right? I think sometimes when we're starting on a new venture, we think, oh my gosh, I don't know if I don't have the right connections. I got to get out there. What groups can I join? But sometimes it helps just to look inward or look at your LinkedIn profile and think, okay, what relationships do I have existing? And before you even get to that place, who are you bringing tamales to? Who are you bringing coffee to? How are you serving your community and managing your relationships so that everything feels like a cold ask, I think is a really important place to start.
And it's very stressful to network. At least for me it was, right? Because I always had I always say my husband is great. Like he'll talk to the neighbors for hours, ask them about their life. And me, I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to park in the back and just go I do say hello. I'm not very unfriendly, but my nature is not to spend a half an hour just talking to a neighbor. It's horrible. I'm totally confessing here. I just get like the anxiety of like, oh my gosh, I need to put in the time and I'm not going to remember the name of the kid or this, or it's work for me. So I remember going to these events, where again, I had to reinvent myself, venture capital. And I knew nobody there. And I'm the only woman, and I'm the only Latina, and I'm the only immigrant. And there's a lot of work and there's a lot of anxiety for you to be smiling through these conversations. Like, what do I say? So for me, I found it easier. And now that I look back into when people say, oh, you're social capital, is because for me, it's easier to do my volunteer work and I don't do it because the people from the VCs are there. They happen to be there because they're the circles that we both are passionate about giving back in our communities or in our neighborhoods or whatever it might be, in our schools with our own kids. I've met so many people at the soccer field, which is incredible. But anyway, whatever you are passionate about and that you want to give back, you will be surprised of how many people there you can find that commonality. And eventually they will help you build your company, your circle of friends, your circle of supporters, potential advisors, etc. So for me, more than inserting into like a difficult networking event, which always was really hard for me, and worse even when they did the Zoom ones where they're like, oh, let's do the breakout rooms and you're just introducing, those were so painful to me.
You've never seen more attrition than when you break people into breakout rooms.
No, that's terrible. But volunteering is a really good way, right? There's so many places that, if you're in LA, for example, there's a day that actually you guys support. Now that I think about it, Tech Gives Back, for example, right? That's one thing that we did along with Pledge LA and the Annenberg, which I'm a part of. And you have every single tech company in one full day giving back. There couldn't be a better networking moment or day, but in a much more relaxed way, right? And also getting to know people as humans, right? More than, oh, let me network here to see if they're going to fund me or they're going to give me a line of credit or whatever it is that you're wanting to do. I think that makes it a little bit easier to do sort of like, and you want to, I don't know, for this next generation, and we'll get to potentially talking about, you're only as good as your team. And teams now, particularly the younger generations, they do care what you stand for as a human, as your personal values, right? So, showing up to events that you care for and letting your team be a part of that, like you guys do with Tech Gives Back, I think it's extraordinary, and it serves that double purpose.
Yeah. Thanks for plugging Tech Gives Back. For anybody who's on the line today and wants to join us, hosting that event in October, great place to network with a ton of tech companies who come together to do good for the community. But you mentioned something, you've mentioned two words that I want to click into. So advisor and mentor.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the differences between the two for you, and how do you personally view them from a professional standpoint as you build your companies?
Yeah, I think I never grew up with a mentor, except, well, I would think more on the professional side. My parents were not in the entertainment industry. One was an attorney and the other one is a psychologist. So they first of all, they didn't understand, anything that I did. But I would say I got some good advice from my dad, and it was much more on the personal side of like, don't burn yourself, etc. Like burnout, not burn.
Oh,
but like
okay.
I would
Right.
work
Yes.
crazy hours,
Both
and he was
important.
like, burnout. There's my English as a second language. I'm always like, you got to excuse me. I learned by watching Bugs Bunny when I was growing up in Mexico. But anyway, so I would say, but I don't know that there was a thing about having mentors, and maybe there was, and I just fully missed it. So I learned that concept probably much later in my career when I moved to the US. And advisors, I think, is so a mentor, as I've learned here, is somebody that, likes you in a way that you look up to, and that has the time to give you some sort of advice, right, in your career, whatever it is that you're going to do. I find that with mentors, time is a little limited because, usually they're very, very busy, and it's almost like a favor. So, and they're mentors that are incredibly generous with their time. So for those, that's amazing. If you want something that has like a KPI attached to, like the time that they're going to give you, that you're going to be certain that they're on board, that they feel that they're part of your company, I would always go for an advisor. And for the advisors, you could do either way. There could be a cash compensation, or there could be equity compensation. Most advisors, because they don't need the cash, most of them, they'd rather take the equity from your company. And it's not a lot of equity, but there is skin in the game, like we say, right? They feel part of, and they feel a part of it, and pride to see the company grow because they have a little bit of that equity. So for me, I think that for startups, it's a better, you can track better the time, you can track better your ROI, you can, ask for more if it's more of an advisor that has that equity, or that has something. It could also be, we've had advisors that had paid compensations, or both sometimes, but I'm big on advisors. And you just have to make sure that you are asking of them what you need, because a lot of boards, my board, for example, does not love advisors. They love advisors, they just don't love the idea of advisors that get equity and it's untracked. So you never see them in months. There's adding no, benefit to the growth of the company. I'm a very type A founder, so I definitely have I negotiate with them how many hours on average a month. We have certain set times, things that I ask of them that they do in their own time, meetings that are set within their own time as well. But I definitely make the best use of my advisors, and that's how their equity continues to vest.
And when it came to negotiating the equity that advisors received, as you were setting up that structure within your company, was that guidance that you received from the board? Where did you go to get that initial information?
The first time I heard from my previous company, from our board, that we gave too much equity to an advisor. So I thought, oh, okay, so this means this percentage is too much. So that was just stuck in my mind. So it was very just by learning. This go around, I asked the board, and then I also asked some of the advisors who are advisors of other companies. So they were like, well, listen, for what you're asking me, for the time that you want me to contribute to the company, this would be what I would want to make equity-wise. So every advisor I have is equity only. And then there's some advisors that put in double, triple the time, or that are very, very well known. So they might put the same amount of time as somebody who is getting a fourth of the equity, but that time is incredibly valuable. So there's no one size fits all. It depends on who the person is, how many hours or how much they're giving you. And then, but there are parameters, right? Like I would say, for if anybody wants a number, I'm happy to give it. But for somebody like super legit, incredibly well known, and incredibly engaged, boards usually are like, you're going to give up 1 point, right, 1% of the equity. That would be on the very, very high end. And then for others, you could be like a quarter of a point, half of a point for somebody very engaged but not at that level. So it depends. So it's not a lot, it's not crazy.
Yeah. And then for someone who's seeking for the first time, I would say mentors are probably easier to how to move forward, right? That's less of a formal relationship. You can go for advice as you need it. And those are people that you can either you could set up a formal structure, or it could just kind of be as needed connection based on relationship. But for advisors, what would you say the first step would be for someone who's considering, bringing on their first advisor to their company?
Well, the most important thing is that that advisor is going to complement a skill that you need in the company, right? For me, certainly in this venture is finance, because I am a marketer at heart, and now I have pivoted into fintech. So the type of advisors that are needed are certainly in product development, which is going to be very different than another founder. So where are the areas that you feel that you have a need? And that's how you find an advisor that's going to fill that need without you having to bring in, because when you're at a very early stage, you don't have the cash to bring on that C-level person yet. So the advisor, I think, is a really great way that you are filling sort of like that need without having to pay up the cash that you don't have. And then they're incredibly experienced C-level people, right? Or at least the ones that I have. So yes, I would always say, what is it that you don't have and that you need? And then obviously look for that. But beyond the intellectual, advice that they can give you, or the social capital also with their connections, I always think that it's very, very important that you also make sure that you are values and mission aligned with everybody that is going to come into your company. Clearly, the most important with your investors, and potentially if you have co-founders, with a co-founder, because there's nothing more disastrous than not being mission and values aligned with your investors and with a co-founder. But that applies to everybody else, to your employees, to your advisors. Because, for example, like when you make a decision on our mission at SUMA is to help build our community wealth. So some products and services might not be that suitable to do that for our community, although it could be incredibly, beneficial for the company when it comes to making money. But we all need to be sort of like in alignment on, because you don't want somebody advising you on something that you're like, oh, well, that goes exactly against my mission statement or my vision for the company. So it's important that you pay a lot of attention there of like, what are the things that are, very, very critical for you? What is that North Star, and that everyone that comes into your company is going towards that North Star. They can have a different point of view on how to get there, but it's important that everybody's sort of like going to the same place.
I think that is such good wisdom. And I think it's harder in practice when you're feeling kind of the crunch of growth and the need to kind of bring on the resources, the support, the financing, I mean, all of it, right? In the moment, it's like, oh my gosh, it's almost like the buy now button.
Yeah.
Price is going to increase and you just want to click the button because it seems like an easier way out. But or an easier path forward, which ultimately we know is not true, but it's hard to keep that perspective. So how do you keep that perspective in moments of extreme stress to make sure that you're not clicking that buy now button?
Listen, I did the buy now button in my previous company. So, and I paid the consequences, right, for doing that. I could argue that I did not go in with my eyes wide open into knowing, and I never heard anybody at a conference say this to me before, right? Like, make sure you do due diligence on investors, or make sure you do. So I didn't know. I was just grateful to be that stat of the 0.36% that gets the funding within my community. So I did it. And I think that from those learnings, right, my rabbi says, as long as you don't come out of your pain empty-handed, it's all worth it. So there was a lot of pain, but I did not come empty-handed. So you have to make sure that in my next venture, I was not going to be so quick to press the buy now button. And it was tough because I'd never raised pre-seed. I started my previous venture at a Series A, and those investors, first of all, they were in a different sector, tech media. Second of all, investors in the Series A are no investors in the pre-seed of a fintech. So already I was feeling very stressed that I have zero relationships in today, right, in this world. And who am I to say no to somebody willing to hand me capital? But I knew that it was the wrong decision. So as hard as it was, I'm super proud. And I could regret it too, because I could have said, like, I could fund my company. And that's where it's a very personal decision. Go in with your eyes wide open. You might know this is not exactly the investor or the advisor or the co-founder or the COO that I would have hired. But what's at stake if I don't do it? And the outcome might outweigh that, but be clear that that's a decision that you're making, right? Like it'll have a consequence. And if you're good with that, that's personal. For me, I wanted to really not come empty-handed from my pain. So I just I'm very aware of who I want to surround myself with at every level. I'm very aware of culture. I never thought about culture. Like I think I always had great culture within my previous companies, but until you don't have good culture, you appreciate culture, right? And it's so easy when it's small. It's so easy when you know the names of everybody and you know what's happening in their life. But once you hit 150 employees, I was meeting people at the bathroom for the first time, because it's impossible for you to do now all the interviews of people who are coming into your company. Or maybe it's not impossible, but that's what I was told, don't waste your time interviewing everybody. It's fine. But then I would meet people in the bathroom, probably have a horrible onboarding process where I should have met people before the bathroom. And then I would be introducing myself. I'm like, hi, my name's, Beatriz. And they're like, oh yeah, we know who you are. That was the answer. I was like, okay, well, I don't know who you are. So it would be great if you tell me your name. What do you do in the company? It was so awkward, right? And that's where you start to think, oh, wow, like, I think like the culture you have when you start just completely dilutes as you grow. And it's really set from you, from the top. There's nobody else. HR is not going to set your culture. The culture set by a founder, the culture set by a CEO. So you have to put in the time too, right? To continue to nurture the way, for me, I was like, listen, I'd like to have a culture where people say hello to each other, right? Like, because these kids in the bathroom were not saying hello to me. They're just like washing there. And I was just like, hi, making my introduction. But I'm like, nowhere did we say like, this is important for us, right? Like to just stop for a second and say hello to people. So it was definitely our mistake. And as you grow, it becomes harder and harder to control. But, for me today, I don't have 150 employees yet. I'm going to be very vigilant of that, right? Like just to feel great, to feel like, you want to wake up and go to work and, you believe so much in what you're doing and building, but you also have a great time is so important. And like we said, for this younger generation, it's very, very important, where they work, what the values are, what the culture is, what you stand for. So I think it's going to be harder to not pay attention to it as companies continue to grow.
Yeah. And I think that points back to the importance of, having that clear vision at the beginning, right? Because you could say that later as a company grows, you can kind of, the mistakes are not so obvious, right? The perspectives that are considered to help guide strategy, they don't have such a drastic effect on a company's, founding mark and right. The foundation that's being laid. And so when you think about this concept of social capital and whose perspectives you're entertaining and whose guidance you're seeking, who you're giving equity to, I mean, really being cautious and thoughtful about at this very, if you are an early stage founder at this point, at this very vulnerable stage, how do we protect our most valuable asset, which is our budding culture, which is our product? How do we really just play defense to make sure that we're not pushing that buy now button, which I guess that analogy will to,
I love it. Yeah, but listen, it's a tough choice because I think it's unfair to tell a founder, don't take the money, right? It's a privilege to be offered money. It's a privilege to be at a place where some of us are. So it's hard to tell someone who's tried for many years to raise capital, don't take the capital because, that VC or whatever, might not be exactly tied to your values. They might not care, and they might think their mission and what they're doing is bigger than that. And like I say, as long as you go with your eyes wide open, it's a very personal decision on who you're hiring. But that also is a reflection on, on you and people you want to be able to hire the best. You're only as good as your team. We said that earlier. And, people want to work for companies that have a great culture, for companies that have great investors, that you don't want to be so nervous and people so anxious around a board meeting because God knows if you're going to get yelled by this investor or that, or like the demands they're going to. I bring so many people into the boardroom, particularly women. I've asked, and not just in my companies, but in other boards that I serve, that I see that there's a lack of women, particular lack of women of color, certainly a lack of Latinas, because we're only 1% on the boards represented, which is insane. And I ask if they can become observers on the board, so they'll know. For me, my first board meeting was, in my previous company, and I didn't know what to do. Like, I'm like, do I stand up when I present? Do I sit down? Do I make a joke? Like everything in the US, it's like people make jokes, like the president makes jokes. Everything in Mexico is so formal. So I was like, how do I behave in a board meeting? Like, I just had to sort of like smile through it and learn as I went. And so I never wanted somebody like me to go through that. So I bring them every time. I have other women present. I don't present. The board knows me. They funded me, right? Like, I want people they don't know for whenever they need to replace me, for whenever they have another incredible company, for whenever there's a huge opening. And I've had that happen before, where my investors have said, hey, how about that incredible woman that one time presented marketing? Couldn't she be our CMO? Right? And it's like amazing. It was their idea. But if you are intentional, but you also want them to have, well, hopefully have a good experience. So even it starts there, because those board meetings, you start preparing a month early, and it matters, right? It just every little thing, who you align yourself in life, in business, just speaks volumes of who you are, what you stand for. So it's important. It's important.
That's what I mean. That's what I love about you, because you have had doors, you have busted down doors, and you've had doors opened for you kind of simultaneously. You've preserved the relationships along the way. And now that the door is open for you, you're holding it open for those behind you, and you're actively inviting them to join you, which I think is so powerful. So if every woman on this session, or that has attended the Startup Grind sessions this month or in the future, thinks about doing that, what type of movement and what type of transformation could we see across the ecosystem? And when you think about the true power of social capital, and it's the allies too, I don't want to say it's only, women or however you identify, but really thinking intentionally about who is the door open for behind you, and how are you intentionally asking them to follow or join? That, I think, is when you want to talk about powerful social capital. It's a group of people that understands their responsibility there. And you talk about that regularly. Okay, I want to transition into investors. I know we're kind of running low on time, and there's so much to discuss on this topic in general. But you have built two amazing companies, right? You are scaling, you're growing, and with the capital that you've raised comes the investors. And so I'm just curious how you have navigated those investor relationships, not just to extract the capital to fund the work, but then beyond that, how have you taken the additional offerings that are available from each individual and maximize those opportunities along the way?
Listen, there's some investors that you can't even maximize any opportunity, right? And we call them sort of like dead weight in your cap table. And maybe for some founders, they like that because they're like invisible. I never liked that. But we had some investors in my previous venture that they just every round they would continue to invest, and they would add nothing else. So listen, we were grateful for their check, but I do think that if you have the opportunity to have, the capital in that sense, the cash contribution, but then their intellectual capital on how they can add to the way you're thinking or building your company, plus the relationship side, that is the ideal, right? Not everybody's going to be that. The people that added nothing were mission aligned, were values aligned, they were good humans, and they put up money, but they never contributed to anything else in the company. So that's also an important thing to see from the people that were willing to put in the work. Well, depends. Some of them were just incredibly well connected with other investors, and they were willing to put in a great word. Some other ones, were experts on how you would scale a company, and we would take that. So it depends on each one of the investors. But again, that is where you need to make sure that is also aligned with you, because sometimes you would get, these comments on a board meeting where you're like, what? Like, we don't even do that in this company. So it's important. I mean, my past, this new company that I did with an investor was with somebody that I explained to how this demo that I serve is US born, English dominant, college educated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then after an hour and a half, he tells me that I should go to the consulates of Nicaragua, Colombia, Venezuela to go recruit my audience. And I'm like, did you not understand? So somebody like that in a board meeting, I would think that would never understand the difference between one or the other. So I'm like, okay, that person is going to be hard that they add. So, you extract what is their best social capital that can contribute to the growth of your company or to you personally, because that's also very important. And then, the ones that don't contribute, that they are only there for the cash, and that might be okay. But if somebody can replace them with the cash and the intellectual capital and the social capital, then that's, to me, like a winning trinity.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. Okay. So we've talked a lot about giving back, and I want to just understand, for you, how has giving back to your community been beneficial to you in your journey? And I know that is not why you are giving back, but I imagine that there is also added benefit to kind of that concept of reciprocity, and it's an art, and it's important. And I think I would like to kind of pause on that to make sure that we walk away with the ability to kind of add that finesse to our arsenal moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't do anything to support my community or to give back thinking that is going to help me or it's going to pay me back from the universe or God or whoever you believe in. I grew up with parents who were incredibly social activists and philanthropists. So my weekends were on, going to my communities and doing social work since I was a little kid. My family has a foundation. So that's existed for the past 30 years. When my father passed away, he left absolutely every cent that he built in his wealth to his community to serve others who had less than we did as a family. So that is in my DNA, giving back and showing up, like I said, like being generous with my time and showing up. So I've just done it. But now that I look back, when people say, oh my gosh, you're so lucky, or oh my God, how are you so connected? Or, how do you know so many people? Like we said at the beginning, I think it's that, right? It's exactly, that you're there, that you show up, and that you're there for people. And listen, sometimes it's not easy, because running a startup, for everybody here, you guys know, you work 16, 18-hour days, normal. So for me to be making introductions to founders, to VCs, or VCs connecting them with founders that they want, or helping somebody with their decks, or which I do all the time, takes time, right? So it's one less hour of sleep, or one less hour of being with your kids, or one less Peloton ride, or one less meditation. But in a way, I always feel that it's my responsibility, right? I look around and there's not a lot of people like me in a position of privilege. So, I've been given, this opportunity, or these opportunities in my life. And I feel that it's my absolute duty to give back. So, I mean, has it helped me? Yes, right? I'm incredibly well connected. I know so many people, and I will continue to do it because I want to, because it feels great. I feel as excited to help another founder raise capital than when I raise my own capital, right? And it's amazing, because you're just like, did I just do that, right? One email, one phone call, one validation of somebody, you're like, wow, that's powerful. That's how men do it, right? And the fact that you're able to have that power to do it feels incredible. And I think more people should not feel like there's scarcity and there's only room for them, because there's really room for all of us. And I'm a big believer in collective impact. And I think that if we really band together, and really say we're going to be supportive of one another, and there is room for all of us. There's room on the boards, there's room on the SPACs, there's room on the fundraising side, there's room on the C-suite. We're so much better together than everybody trying to go their own way in their individual efforts.
I wish we were here in person, because I would love to see the audience's reaction to this. And I think this is why it's so important, right? Because the energy around the giving back, the finding time, the opening the doors. It is a different energy than out to get mine, gonna hustle till I make it and everybody get out of the way. It is a contagious energy. And I think that, in the future of innovation, I hope we build on that. And I hope we let that manifest, because that is gonna, I think, change the way we do business, how we show up, who shows up, where we're showing up, all of it. So I think I'm out of time, unfortunately, because I want to talk to you all about culture. But I loved what you said earlier about, making those intentional efforts to build a culture that is sustaining, that is welcoming to people, and that elevates, right? And using that when we think about social capital, being the people that you're bringing into your company, into the company, as your greatest asset of all, right?
Absolutely.
Feed and develop.
Absolutely. That's how you retain them, right? And that's how they want to always, work with you. I have people I know we're out of time, but people working in SUMA that this is the third startup that they've worked with me, right? And anytime you call them and, startup, very little money, lots of hours of work, crazy weekend time, and they're like, we're there. That means, you've done something right.
That's right. Well, again, Beatrice, as always, it's a privilege to share stage with you. And Grace, I know that you are
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you, Grace. I think my answers are so long-winded. I apologize. I didn't let Courtney get through half of her questions.
On behalf of the audience, here's what they would be doing. Applause, applause to both of you. Thank you so much for all your insights. It was wonderful to hear both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.